you living for? I want to share an article that I came across. It's made a lot of headlines this week. Ran across it 2 or 3 times, both in some of our local radio stations talking about it, as well as national. There is a magazine I check out every now and then called The Atlantic. They write very provocative, forward-thinking, forward-leaning types of articles and discussion. And Derek Thompson, one of their writers, wrote an article this week. The title of it is "Workism is Making Americans Miserable." Workism is making Americans miserable. What caught my ear in hearing about this article, and the attention that it is getting, is that he talks about the gospel of work. He talks about how, as our traditional religions decline, how people care less and less about Christ. And as religion, we're not religious, we are in relationship, but as religion declines, it's coinciding with new atheism. There's new atheisms that are rising. There are new thoughts that are rising as the cross, the reality of Christ, is further off the idea and the thoughts of our culture, that what's filling in the void is different types of atheisms. He talks about worshiping beauty. He talks about worship political identities and how we can even worship our children, that people will worship something.
Yeah.
And his article is that as the void, as we care less, as our culture cares less about Christ and moves the story of Christ and the reality of Christ more to the sideline, that there's things that are filling in the void, and he puts forth this idea of workism. The idea of workism is a belief that work is not only necessary to economic production, but also it is the centerpiece of one's identity and one's life purpose. Workism is this idea that work isn't just to make money, it's the entire identity of who you are. It is the most central thing about you. Now, I'm saying this as one of these new atheisms, as one of these new things that is absent of Christ. I'm not saying this as a thing that we ought to embrace. I'm saying this as the culture around us. We're identifying what the culture around us is valuing and seeing importance in and lifting up. And we were seeing this article getting a whole lot of attention and a whole lot of conversation, and it's based on the idea of workism. He says that the concept of work has shifted in the last century from jobs to careers to callings. That now our occupations are or is our calling. No longer is it the focus of a calling from the Lord. It's now a calling from your job, from your check, from your occupation, from what you've learned from your schooling. That now becomes your work experience, and that is your calling. We've switched from a job to a career to a calling. He says that in the last 100 years, it has moved from necessity to status to calling. He says religions worship the intangible things, but work is tangible. You get a paycheck at the end of your job, and because you can hold on to that check and actually do something with it, he sees that as tangible and God as being intangible. He says to be a workist is to worship a God with firing power. What are you living for this morning? What is your centerpiece of importance? The author says that I'm most myself when I'm fulfilled by my work. And I hope you hear this morning that in all of these things, this is where Christ is in our hearts. This is where Christ ought to be, must be in all of our hearts. He ought to be first place. It ought to be Christ that is the center of our lives, and not our work, and not our children, and not our spouses, and not our cars, and not our material things, but Christ and Christ alone.